Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to The Why Teacher. Today we're starting off with a new series, Classroom Stories. So in this first episode, I'd like to share a story of a young boy that I taught in grade 6. And I believe the story has stayed with me because, when I talked about outstanding teachers and I shared their, traits, I had mentioned that observation was on the top of the list. And this story actually was a product of good observation and catching a moment in time in a classroom to teach a child a very important lesson. So our school, like most schools, used to have two break times. The first break time was for the children to go have a snack or play around, and then the second break, of course, was their Zohar break, which meant that they could go and perform their Zohar prayers in the room marked as the mosque room. And it was working all well until there was a time when most teachers started to complain that children would come back to their classrooms late, and as a result they were missing their lessons. So a rule was set up that children would have to make it back in time for the classes, or the door for the classroom would be closed and they would not be allowed inside because the lesson would have started. And so related to this, a really interesting incident happened inside my classroom. So one of the boys in my classroom also used to go to pray. And when the rule was implemented and he came back late, he was not allowed to go inside the classroom as I had already started teaching. And so he had to, of course, go through the drill of sitting with the supervisor, giving an explanation of why he was late, and eventually he was allowed to come inside. Now, when he did so, of course, he came in a very sour mood. And before he sat down, he just picked up his chair and he banged it on the floor. And to me, that was a very clear statement of him being really unhappy. And so I stopped the lesson for a minute and I asked him, why are you feeling so angry? And he was filled with emotion at that time, and he was very loud and very angry, and he said, this is very unfair that I get to do my prayers and when I come back I find the door closed, and this is something that is not acceptable. And so I said to him, well, you have 15 minutes and it would be great if you could just complete your prayers within those 15 minutes and still be able to follow the rules of the school and come back and make it in time. And to that he replied to me very firmly and sternly, and he said that these are my prayers and my prayers cannot be rushed, and I am not going to compromise on that because my prayers take time. And to me, that clearly showed his commitment towards his prayers, and that was something that needed to be respected. But at the same time, there was a bit of rigidity that I sensed in his tone, which made me realize that we need to explore this a little more. And so, of course, I asked the children to close their books, and we said, look, boys and girls, we've got a problem and we need a solution for the problem. So how many of you are in agreement with him that prayers are not to be rushed and need to take time? So of course all of them raised their hands. And I said, okay, now I need to know, how many of you go for your prayers in the break time, raise your hands. So again, all the boys raised their hands. And then, of course, I added saying that, boys, the one that you pray to is watching you right now. And you wouldn't believe that, all of the hands went down except that one child who was having a problem. So this is how honest children are, and this is how morally, how morals can become stronger. You ask them a question and yes, they do respond to it. And so eventually it turned out it was a problem for that one child, and that's where I saw the opportunity for learning. And I said, well, it turns out that you're the only one in the classroom who's facing this problem, but nevertheless, it is a problem and we need to solve it. So I said, why don't you all, get together and sit down and think of a solution and come to me with it. So I gave them a little bit of time. They got into their groups, they discussed it, and eventually one of them said, miss, the reason why we get late for the prayers is coming back to classroom is because the prayer room is in the other block. So we had 2 blocks of buildings, and these children had to go to the other block for their prayers. So I said, if we can assign a room in our own block, maybe this would be solved. So I said, fantastic, why don't we write that on a piece of paper and, let's address the supervisor. Let's write down that we are facing this problem. We suggest this solution. Do you think that this is going to work? So they did that. And eventually, I called in the supervisor, they presented the letter to her, and they said, look, this is the problem that we're facing. And I of course, backed up the children, and I said, that's a very doable solution. Maybe you should take it to the principal and discuss it with her. And she, of course, got it, and she understood it, and she said, it's a very good solution. I've been trying to find a solution myself, and thank you very much, and I'll take it forward. Now, apparently, the problem had been resolved, and the children thought that it's done. But I had only sorted, of course, part of the problem, which was the importance of prayers and what it meant to the child. But I still needed to address the idea of him being rigid about it. And so before he could sit down, I asked him once again, and I said, okay, how do you feel now? And he gave me a big smile, and he looked at his friends and he said, thank you very much for helping me solve my problem. So I took that moment to address him and the rest of the classroom, and I said, look, in religion, and especially with Allah being so merciful, we should always take the approach of, finding solutions. So if there is a problem, instead of us being rigid about things, we should try to find solutions and keep that approach as, our way of, understanding how everything can come towards a compromise. And I, of course, wanted to explore this a little more. So I went ahead and I said, look, in any religion, numbers don't matter. So whether it's one person having trouble or it's many people having a problem, the idea always is to try and be kind and be compassionate and be empathetic and try to solve the problem, because religion is something that's always important to people, and what they practice, what they do, holds meaning to them. So next time, if somebody walks up to you, and this is a question I posed to him, and I said, next time somebody walks up to you and is not of your religion, but is just that one person who's having difficulty in trying to, follow what he believes in, are you going to be rigid, or are you going to try and find a solution for them? And of course, you can guess what the answer was. With a big smile, he said, of course, we're going to try to find a solution for them. And so this incident really opened up, a lot of avenues for learning. And it wasn't a planned, approach. It wasn't something that just that was thought through. So a lot of times, opportunities like these arise inside the classroom, and it's always worth it to close the lesson plan that you've created, because this is what we call lifelong learning. I'm sure that the children in that classroom, at least many of them, must have picked up an important lesson on tolerance, an important lesson on flexibility, and an important lesson on, understanding what it is to be a minority. And so it's a lesson of kindness, it's a lesson of hope, and a beautiful story that I thought I'd share with you today.